the damage that the government policy can have on a local startup ecosystem is much greater than the positive impact it can have. So the idea over here is simple. If a government is taking the wrong steps, forget about helping the ecosystem, but if it's taking the wrong steps, it's going to practically kill the ecosystem. That's basically the idea. So the idea is that entrepreneurs must trust their ability to achieve great things in the country. And you have a few countries where people are totally sure that nothing good can come out of entrepreneurship in this country, and they always think about how can they move to another place. So the idea over here is to be in a situation that the country has the trust of its local founders, and some countries do not have that. And this is a very sad situation, let's say. Now, the idea is that if the government policies create uncertainty and confusion with founders, it's over, basically, at this point. So the idea is that if there is a lot of uncertainty, confusion, and because building a startup is one giant mess of confusion. It doesn't matter if you do it in Canada, in the USA, or in Turkey, Russia, or Guatemala. If the government is adding another layer of confusion to the already existing situation of confusion, it's too much. It's not something that a regular founder that is not a Superman can handle. So the idea for the government is to stay out of the way and make it very, very clear to let the founders focus on the key things that every founder has to focus on, instead of spending time on dealing with government barriers, let's say. So the biggest barrier of governments is basically bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a silent killer of startup ecosystem. And the idea over here is that you want to make it as easy as possible to incorporate, to report, accounting, and so on, and to make changes. So that's basically really, really important. The clarity, and make it simple for the founders to operate. Now, geopolitical situation is also very important. I'm coming from Israel. It's a very, let's say, challenging ecosystem. Not the ecosystem, it's a challenging geopolitical situation. However, Israel is a great demonstration that bad geopolitical situation can be in your advantage, and we're going to speak about that. So some countries are stuck in a situation that they have a little bit of conflict or some kind of internal problem and so on. It does not mean that you can't have a great startup ecosystem if you play your cards right, even in those cases. And the conclusion for this slide is basically the following. If a government can only choose one activity to do to support its local startup ecosystem, and it can do only one thing, what we would recommend for it is to stay out of the way. Just let founders build their things without being in their way. And this is critical, because being in the way of founders and kind of making them adversaries or not someone you support, or you make difficulties for them, is going to totally crush the startup ecosystem. So that's kind of like the first lesson that we always speak about, basically stay out of the way.